What's up, BookTube? Sandy Golson back here with another video, and this one's going to be a little bit of a different type of a video. I'm going to talk about the legendary horror novelist Stephen King. And in this particular video, I'm going to talk about my top 10 favorite Stephen King books and or stories specifically that I've read of Stephen King over the many years that I've been reading books. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. But before I do, I want to say that some of them are books that I read a long time ago. And so my memory is maybe a little bit fuzzy on some of the stories or some of the books that I've read, but they still left an imprint that I still remember. And some of them I might even go back and reread at some point because there are some iconic stories tucked away here that I think a lot of people have maybe forgotten that Stephen King actually wrote these books because many of them were adapted to movies that became very, very popular films. And I think sometimes maybe the book behind the movie has gotten lost because of the movies that in many cases turned out to be, if not classics, certainly very memorable movies for many people. So with that, I'm going to jump right into it. I'm going to go from 10 up to number 1. Number 10 is one of the most recent books that I've read from Stephen King, and it is called Joyland. Now, if you go back on one of my wrap-up videos, you'll notice that I've read that book fairly recently. So it is one of the more recent Stephen King books that I read, and it sounded very interesting. It was kind of a horror story that was told at an amusement park, and so it was kind of interesting, and it just had some things that kind of grabbed me. It was kind of a supernatural type of a vibe to it, and so I thought it was kind of interesting, so I jumped into it and read it. It was kind of an interesting read in that it was kind of like one long narration, and wasn't really broken up into necessarily chapters, and so it was kind of difficult. Like when I read, I like to be able to feel like I'm making a certain amount of progress, and so when I get to chapter ends and start new chapters, I feel kind of re-energized, like I've made progress and I can move on to the next one. And without those chapters, I felt like I was kind of pulling a weight behind me, and so it was a little bit more difficult to get into it. And the story was, while it was good and it was interesting and I was glad I read it, it wasn't quite what I was hoping for, but it was still a read that I was glad that I took on. It was a book that I picked up, I think in a department store. I went by the bookshelf and I saw it and I thought, oh, that sounds kind of interesting, so I'll pick it up. And so that comes in at number 10. Number 9 is a book that I bought a long time ago, and that is Geralds Game. And Geralds Game is a book that I had, again, for a long time, and it sat on the bookshelf for many, many years. And then I saw the Netflix movie, Geralds Game. I think it was on Netflix. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was on Netflix. And so it made me think about the book a little bit more. And the book was, I thought, better than the movie, but that is typically the case. But it was, it's kind of a creepy story, and the feeling of being trapped and not really having anything or anyone that can really help you, and so you start to maybe see and hear things. And so it's kind of in a lot of ways it's kind of classic Stephen King, and so I really enjoyed it. Again, the book more so than the movie, but it was one that, again, I had on the shelf for a long time. Had a very intriguing art cover. I should probably have grabbed the hardcover copy of the book that's around here somewhere, but I'll put the thumbnail of the cover right there. So you know, it was a good one. It was interesting. It was creepy. It was a very classic Stephen King. And so Gerald's Game comes in at number 9 on my list. Number 8 is a book that I read very recently, and that was a book that I got a bundle of Stephen King books off of eBay, and I was kind of waiting for the right collection to pop up because there were a few books that I was looking for. One was Firestarter, the other was The Shining, and then Cujo and Christine were a couple that I was maybe a little bit less interested in, but they came in the bundle, and so I was really excited to be able to pick up that bundle. I got it for a pretty good price, and so I jumped into Firestarter, and I kind of partially read the hard. Actually, it was a paperback. It was an old paperback version of it, and then I listened to some of the audio version of the book, which was on YouTube. So I got a little bit of both, and it was good. I wanted to definitely read the book because I had seen the movie, it's been floating around, and I wanted to watch the movie, but I also wanted to make sure I read. I've seen parts of the movie, but I've never really watched the movie, even though it's over 30 years old. I've never actually watched the movie all the way through. I've seen bits and pieces of it. And so before I watched the movie, I thought, you know what? I think I want to read this book first. And the book was good. It was kind of longer maybe than it needed to be. I think it could have been, the story could have been tightened up a little bit, and I think it would have been, the flow would have been even better. But it was an intriguing book, and I just really, every time I picked it up, I was really excited about it. I'm a slow reader, so I know a lot of you are out there like, man, I read books in like one setting, just knock it out and then move on to something else. That's not really the way I get down. For me, it's a little bit more of a challenge because I'm just doing so many different things. So, it's a little bit more difficult for me. But I did enjoy Firestarter. Very happy that I was able to read it before watching the movie from cover to cover, or watching the movie from beginning to end. It's the book that you read from cover to cover, right? Coming in at number 7 is The Long Walk, which is part of the Bachman books, written by Stephen King as Richard Bachman. And so there'll be another one that you'll actually another, I think 2 that'll pop up here. But it's a dystopian dictator, a militaristic dictator, and they have this long walk that people have to do, and it's really interesting. And I'm a little bit fuzzy because I read it so long ago. I probably read it 20 some years ago. So I'm actually probably more than that, probably like 25 years ago. When I was in high school. I know I'm giving my age away big time there, but it was really good. I enjoyed it, and the Bachman books is actually something I want to pick up again at some point, but that was one that I did enjoy. It was very, very intriguing. I might see if the audiobook is out there somewhere, because I can't find my copy of the Bachman books. It's buried somewhere, maybe in my garage or something like that. So maybe I'll stumble across it one day if I finally ever get my garage fully cleaned out. Maybe that one will pop up. But in the meantime, I will probably look at it look for it on an audiobook, and I think that those books, some of those Bachman books, have been broken out into individual books, so I might be looking for that as well. But The Long Walk comes in here from Stephen King. Coming in at number 6, back with the Bachman books, is one that I think a lot of people will recognize more so the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that is The Running Man. And I actually kind of refreshed my memory a little bit more recently with The Running Man as I listened to the audiobook one night while I was going to sleep. I was listening to it off and on, and I was not sleeping very well, and so I was listening to some audiobooks there, and sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. I think and this is a little bit of a sidebar, but I think sometimes with audiobooks, for me at least, the nonfiction kind of sinks in a little bit better than the fiction books, with a few exceptions. But yeah, I really enjoyed reading this again, audio book, if you will. The movie is good. I do like the movie of The Running Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger, but there's something about the book that was very, very interesting, and I enjoyed it when I originally read it many, many years ago, and I enjoyed it more recently when I listened to the audiobook. And the movie, again, also very enjoyable, The Running Man. At number 5 is probably one of the more controversial books that Stephen King has ever read, and he has said at times that he is kind of distanced himself from that book, and it's Rage, and he wrote it as Richard Bachman, and it was part of the Bachman books. But actually, if you buy new copies of the Bachman books right now, I think some of those copies don't actually have the story Rage, and it has to do with a school shooting incident, and we've had many of those. I think, going back, I'm not saying this was the first one, but going back to Columbine, and then some of the other ones that have happened in more recent years that the nation has had to deal with. And I think it's maybe caused a lot of people to rethink some things about certain types of stories. And I think Stephen King was among those rethinking these types of stories. I read this story the first time when I was in high school, and it was a powerful read even back then. This was pre-Columbine, so again, I'm aging myself here a little bit, but it was powerful, very, very powerful. I actually haven't read that book since I was in high school. Again, if I find my old copy of the Bachman books, I will probably read it. but since it's a little bit difficult to find in the newer publishings of the Bachman books, it might be one of those ones. If you really, really want to read it, you're probably going to have to go on eBay and see if you can find it there, or maybe a used book through Amazon or some other service that sells books. So, but be careful. Make sure that you get if you're interested in that particular story, make sure you get a copy that does have that, because I've seen some people who bought the Bachman books expecting Rage to be in there. It wasn't in there, and they ended up being really upset. So just buyer beware. Make sure you're getting the right version you want if you do in fact want to read Rage. Coming up next is different seasons. I'm going to actually break this up into two, so kind of bear with me on this, because in different seasons, which includes multiple stories that are in there, there are two iconic stories that I think so many of us remember, again, more so for the movie than for the book, and that can be somewhat unfortunate. But one in different seasons is called Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. And we, of course, know the movie, Morgan Freeman, Tim Robbins. We know that as simply the Shawshank Redemption, and Rita Hayworth, I believe, is mostly just the poster that's used. I don't want to spoil it too much for those of you who haven't seen it, but of course that's an iconic story, and I think a lot of people forget that that's a Stephen King story that was adapted. Another story in that book is called The Body, and many of us remember it as the movie Stand By Me, that was produced, I want to say, in the mid-1980s, an iconic film, a coming-of-age story that I think a lot of people watched and just have really strong feelings about that particular story. And I can't remember, but I feel like I've watched that movie maybe in the last year or so, but just some great young actors in that film. And that made it just really special for a lot of people. But again, great coming-of-age story, certainly with some scary elements, as does Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption, written in different seasons. And so just two really iconic stories in that collection, the different seasons. And different seasons is actually behind me somewhere. And it's one that, or maybe, I don't know, it's around here somewhere. Oh, actually, there it is right there. You can see it right there. Different seasons. So it's a really special book, and I read it, I think, in high school. I think I read that, and I really, really enjoyed it. I was on a huge run of Stephen King books back then, and so that one, Different Seasons, was definitely a special one for me. Coming in at number 2 is not one. It's probably one of the first books of Stephen King that I ever read. And this one, also, like many other Stephen King books, was adapted into a very good and popular film, and that is Misery. And as someone who is a writer, it gives you a little bit of a creepy vibe when you're helpless and you are trapped in a situation. And I think many people remember some just iconic scenes from the movie. Kathy Bates and James Caan were the actors in that film, the main actors in that film, and just some scary moments. Kathy Bates was absolutely phenomenal in the movie, and James Caan was also just outstanding in that film as well. The book, I really enjoyed the book. I read it so fast. It's not one of the longest Stephen King books, but I read it, I just devoured it pretty quickly, and I enjoyed it, every bit of it. It was one of those books when I got to the end, I remember, again, read it in high school, but I remember I got to the end and I'm just like, man, you just did not want it to end, because it was just that not only interesting, but just thrilling and scary at the same time. Again, classic Stephen King. So Misery clocks in at number 2 for me. And finally, number 1 on my top 10 list of Stephen King books that I have read is Carrie. And Carrie is actually the first Stephen King book that I ever read. And again, I read it in high school when I was on that Stephen King tear. And Carrie was the book that got me on the Stephen King tear. It's written almost documentary style, very, very quick read by Stephen King. One of his shorter books. I think he wrote this book when he was very, very young. And so I just loved it. It really was a great introduction to Stephen King. And sometimes when I'm trying to break in with an author that's written many books, or a genre that's very popular that I haven't been able to get into, or haven't gotten into, or haven't found, I usually will ask people, I'm like, okay, what's a good title for me to start with? And sometimes people will say, well, just start in chronological order. And others will say, because the story is not necessarily chronological, this might be a good book to break into for a genre. For a series, it's probably best to start at the beginning, especially if it's progressive. And so, Carrie was a great starting point for me. If I had started with, there are several other books that if I had started Stephen King with, I'm not sure I would have read as many Stephen King books as I did end up reading. So I'm glad I started with Carrie. Again, a lot of people know it from the movie with Sissy Spacek. That was so just scary. And that's a 1970s movie, and it was scary, and it's still scary when you watch it even today. Just some chilling scenes, a very well done film, as many of the Stephen King films actually are very, very well done. So that was one that I definitely enjoyed. The movie is very comparable in terms of quality to the book. So if you've seen the movie, I think you'll enjoy the book, and vice versa. So, but I happen to be glad that, actually, let me think about that. I may have seen the movie before. I'm almost sure I saw the movie before I read the book. So, I think that might be one. I'm almost 100% certain I saw the movie before the book. I probably saw it in some kind of Shocktober movie marathon or something when I was a kid. I can't even remember the first time I saw the movie, but I know I've seen it. I wish I had $15 for every time I've seen that movie. I'd be sitting pretty well right now. So anyway, those are my top 10 Stephen King books that I've read. I've enjoyed many of them, and there's many more that are coming up that I'm going to end up reading. I've got a number of Stephen King books here in my collection that I have not read, and I'm going to talk about some of these Stephen King books, some that are in my collection and some that are not yet in my collection that I intend to read, and that's coming up in a future video as I continue to talk about Stephen King books, and really to illustrate the impact that I think Stephen King has had in terms of literature, in terms of writing and novels, but also the impact he's had with so many of his stories being remade into some iconic films. So just getting started with Stephen King, more to come.